Welcome to Collaborative Leadership Team's overview of the Agile Manifesto and how Scrum relates to it. What is Agile? When we say Agile, what does that mean? There is no such thing as the Agile methodology or one thing called Agile, because Agile generally refers to the Agile Manifesto written in February 2001. There were several frameworks represented at the Snowbird Ski Resort in Utah. 17 people came together for this meeting to share their ideas. The creators of Scrum were there, but the creators of Extreme Programming, also known as XP, were also present. There were members from DSDM, Adaptive Software Development, Crystal, Feature-Driven Development, and Pragmatic Programming also. Everyone shared how they were doing work. Although these frameworks do have differences, what they had in common took the form of 4 value statements and 12 underlying principles. Many of them were software developers, hence the title, Manifesto for Software Development. Now, people who read this Agile Manifesto assume the ideas must only be for software development work. That's not necessarily true when you read the values and principles. Valuing individuals and interactions over processes and tools can apply to all kinds of work. So yes, Agile is popular in software implementations, but these ways of working can easily be used in non-software environments as well. Why is it called Agile? The people present deliberated quite a bit on what to call it. They even talked about calling it light or calling it adaptive, but they found inspiration from the title of a popular business book called Agile Competitors and Virtual Organizations. That's the name that stuck for these 4 values and 12 principles. Agile, nimble. Can you pivot? Can you turn on a dime for a dime in the face of what's happening in the market or with the competition? So Scrum is Agile, but Agile doesn't necessarily mean Scrum. Agile could mean Extreme Programming, Crystal, Pragmatic Programming, and so on. All of these frameworks contributed their ideas to this Agile Manifesto. To see the individual contributors, you can visit agilemanifesto.org. There is a link to view the underlying 12 principles that support the 4 value statements, and we're going to explain a few of those here. Agile has become very popular in industries beyond software development, so please notice that if you replace the word software anywhere in the manifesto with product, those values and principles still make sense. You may want to call it Agile Product Development Manifesto, and it still works. Maybe you're in a services business, calling it Agile Services Manifesto. Maybe you work in some sort of a creative organization or agency. Even marketing organizations have called it Agile Marketing Manifesto. For our purposes, we'll be referring to the original Agile Software Development Manifesto that you can view at agilemanifesto.org. What is often missed in reviewing the 4 value statements is that the things on the left are valued more than the things on the right. Well, there's a big myth when people say, you mean we're not going to have processes and tools? We're not going to have any documentation or plans at all? Whoa, that is not true. That is not what those value statements say. It just says that we're going to talk to each other first. I know, crazy idea. We're going to talk to each other, individuals and interactions. Then we'll figure out the process that we need to use or the tool that we need to support what we're trying to accomplish. We're going to collaborate with the customer. We're going to talk to the customer before we put the contract in front of them. We're going to start experimenting. We're going to get something working. Then we'll write down the results of what we agreed to, or we'll write down the results of what works. Just enough, just in time, in the case of our auditors, just because. We're going to respond to change over following a plan. That doesn't mean we're not going to plan. It's just that change happens. So the more important thing is planning, which allows us to respond more quickly in the face of change, which is inevitable. So we will have processes and tools, documents, contracts, plans. We just don't start with those things. We start with individuals and interactions, customer collaboration, working software or product, and responding to change. Now, the authors of the manifesto decided to get a little bit more specific about what they were talking about. They captured 12 underlying principles that support the 4 value statements. At Collaborative Leadership Team, we like to call this we, not IT. Once again, there's an assumption out there that this is only for information technology or IT departments. That's not true. In our companies, we want to focus on working together. If our organizations are spending more time fighting each other, talking about us versus them, that department over there, hang on. Don't we all play for the same team? Don't we all work for the same company? These 12 principles reflect that we are going to work together differently at this organization, and here's a description of how we're going to do it. Sure, in Principle 1, we're talking about the highest priority being all about the customer and delivering something of value, valuable software, valuable product to them. Think about how many times you've worked on projects where requirements documents didn't refer to the customer or user. They put the point of view from the system. The system shall provide. Well, hang on. We're talking about people. We're talking about the customer. We're talking about satisfying our users with valuable and continuous delivery of product. Does this work for them? And if it does work for our users and customers, what if their world changes? What if their needs change? In principle number 2, you see that we're going to accept this change even late in development for their competitive advantage. We want to keep our customers and our users competitive. This gets into time boxing in principle 3, where we want that time box to be as short as possible. If it's good news, ship it. Hey, if it's bad news, wouldn't we rather know after a couple of weeks instead of a couple of months? Time boxing might be new to you, and you'll hear these terms, sprint, iteration, but it also is covered again in Principle 8. These time boxes don't just work for the people doing the work, it also has to work for those users, those sponsors, yes, and our developers, because we are all trying to maintain this pace together. As you consider Principles 4, 5, and 6, notice it's still all about working together. Business people and developers must work together daily. And hey, in Principle 5, we're talking about the people doing the work being motivated individuals. We're going to give them the environment that they need, and we're going to trust them to get the job done. Principle 6 gets misunderstood all the time. It does say the most effective way to communicate is face-to-face. That doesn't mean you physically have to be in the same room with each other. In this day and age of virtual organizations, we can get face-to-face leveraging web cameras and video conferencing software. It's far more effective to be able to see one another so that nothing gets lost in the message. Although Principle 7 talks about working software, once again, in your context, if that word doesn't make sense, cross out software and put in product or put in services. But Principle 7 is kind of a big deal. The only metric that matters, the only measurement of progress is, does this thing work? Because if it doesn't, we've got to fix it. So all that matters is, does the product do what it says it's going to do? Does this work for our customer? We talked about Principle 8 in relating to Principle 3 when we mentioned time boxing. So moving on to numbers 9 and 10, they were definitely contributed by some of the software developers present. We want technical excellence. We want good design because this will enhance our agility. Principle 10 is talking about no gold plating. Keep things simple. You ain't gonna need it. The Yagni principle. We don't want to keep embellishing. We want to maximize the amount of work not done in order to be more effective. Principle 11 gets into the teamwork aspect of most of these frameworks, not just Scrum. It's really inherent to all the frameworks under the Agile umbrella. So we don't have a named role such as architect, analyst, tester. We get all these people together who have these capabilities and let them figure out the best way to accomplish the work. Principle 12 notes that we want to get better. So at regular intervals, we're going to reflect on what we're doing, how we're doing it, and talk about making improvements. We're not going to wait until it's the end of a long life cycle and then talk about lessons learned. We want to adapt real time. We want to take advantage of process improvements while we're still doing the job. You've now learned that saying the word agile could mean any number of different things. We've summed up the 4 values and the 12 underlying principles, so the next time you hear someone say agile, you can ask, do you mean Scrum? Do you mean extreme programming? Which framework are we really talking about? Even if the answer is, well, we mean Scrum. Scrum is just a way to meet our organization's goals and objectives. It's a way for us to bring about agility, but so are some other frameworks. We really should talk as an organization about why are we even looking at something called Agile? Why are we even looking at something called Scrum? Without a goal, it's really hard to achieve it, and using Agile or using Scrum should not be your goal. We want to meet the company's goals and objectives, and Scrum is one way that we may be able to do that. Let me give you an example. If you were to engage a personal trainer and you asked them to help you lose weight, they were likely to ask you, how much weight? Because just saying lose weight is way too vague. You say, I want to lose 10 pounds. Now we have a goal. Now we have a measurable goal. Then they're likely to say, okay, step on the scale, because we need a baseline measurement. The same is true with any agile way of working. Before you make that change, we need a baseline measurement of how work is measured before you flip the switch. Once you've started working in a different way, if you don't have a baseline measurement, it's hard to say whether we're delivering value any sooner or whether it's more effective than our old way. Oftentimes people are told, we're going agile, just start sprinting. Oh, hey, that was your training. Well, if you start sprinting without a goal, you're running. You have no idea if it's a 5K or a full marathon, but you are running. So it's a good idea to find out why we're looking at changing the way we do work and what we're measuring before we flip that switch and start working in a different way. Okay, so we know now that Scrum is Agile, but Agile doesn't necessarily mean Scrum. What inspired Scrum? A 1986 Harvard Business Review article by Professors Takeuchi and Nanaka called The New Product Development Game. In that article, the professors were talking about organizations that were working differently. It involved teams of people, regardless of their function or job title, pulling together in these rugby-like huddles. A scrummage. That's right. Scrum is not an acronym. It's just short for scrummage. Rugby-like approach where everybody is pulling together to meet the same goal and objective. If you see people put Scrum in all capital letters, it just confuses people because they think that it's an acronym. And that's not true. It's just short for scrummage. Scrum, people working together in a rugby-like approach. How does Scrum more specifically then align with the Agile Manifesto? The 4 value statements are a representation that the entire framework follows. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We've got this Scrum team working together, talking to each other daily at a minimum. We've got working product over comprehensive documentation, which is reflected in the increment that's produced by every single sprint. We've got customer collaboration in the form of the product owner leading product backlog refinement with stakeholders, customers, subject matter experts, and we've got responding to change versus following a plan built right in, because Scrum's foundation is transparency, inspection, and adaptation. We can adapt every single sprint. We can adapt right down to the daily level if it's necessary via the daily Scrum. So the 4 values really guide the entire framework. Some of the underlying principles are reflected in Scrum as well. Principles 1 and 2, where we talked about delivering that value to customers early and often, are reflected in the product backlog because we pull from the product backlog and it is pulled into a sprint, which is short. It's anywhere from 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, enabling us to adapt if something does change. But then remember Principle 10, the simplicity principle. Things at the bottom of the backlog, may never come to fruition. Sometimes people think putting items on the product backlog is a commitment. No, it's more of a might-do list. It doesn't really reach commitment until the item is pulled into a sprint and lands onto the developer's sprint backlog. Prior to the sprint planning event, we may decide to abandon an idea or never pick up that idea again so it can be removed from the product backlog. Earlier, we touched on Principle 3 and 8 being all about time boxing. In Scrum, we call that time box the sprint. In other Agile methods, they refer to it as an iteration. Shorter is definitely better for a shorter feedback cycle, but think about Principle 8 talking about sustainability. We don't want death marches, making people work nights and weekends, because that's sure to burn people out. So once we determine a sprint length, Scrum refers to this as a cadence. It's a sustainable pace. Principle 7 was all about working product, working software. This is reflected in Scrum in both our sprint review, where we review the working product increment, gathering stakeholders together to not only showcase what got done, but to talk about what's coming next. And it's also reflected in that working product increment itself. Principles 9 and 12 are reflected in Scrum in the form of the sprint retrospective. Principle 9 is all about continuing our technical excellence to enhance our agility, and Principle 12 is all about continuous improvement. Scrum provides a time-boxed event called a retrospective to get to root cause about our technical excellence and immediately put into practice a process improvement. So instead of waiting till the end of a long project, we're going to take advantage of good ideas to improve our process immediately. You've now learned that Scrum is Agile and Agile doesn't mean Scrum, but Scrum's not a magic or silver bullet. It's not going to solve your problems. In fact, it may expose problems you already have. Scrum is just a different way of working. If you choose this way of working, it is different. It can deliver value to your customers and users more readily, but only if used as directed. You know what they say, if we don't use as intended, side effects can occur. If you're viewing this video prior to coming to one of our workshops, we'll see you soon. If you're viewing this video and you want to learn more about how to join one of our workshops, visit us at CoLeadTeam.com, CoLeadTeam.com, and click on Upcoming Courses.